looks like everybody is in. So maybe it's
Mhm.
just us four. That's fine. And we'll just start off. So with me today is Arya. Arya is my boo, my baba, the person who shares her life with me and who also self-identifies as being psychopathic. So, do you want to tell them how we met?
Okay, hi everybody. Um, we met when I was in college. My girlfriend at the time encouraged me to read your book and eventually meet you. Had a couple other people as well recommend the book to me to self-reflect, meet this person, see if there's any kind of connection or I make any kind of connection of any likeness between us.
Yeah, so I think you emailed me first, like, what was it, like 7 years ago or something?
Sounds right. Sounds right.
And
College,
then,
yeah.
yeah, and then we have been together now for 2.5 years. And the first time we met in Southern California where I live, and you had been visiting a friend also who lives here.
Yes.
And then you emailed me and you said, "Hey, do you want to meet?" And I said something like, "Sure." And then we met, and then we went bike riding, and I crashed, and I was sick. And what was your first impression of me? It wasn't that great, right?
My first impression of you, obviously, was through this lens. She was very sick, eating these cough drops like candy,
Yep.
And I think I told you, we could have like scheduled this a different day or something if you're like feeling under the weather. But whatever, you insisted on staying. Um, Mostly, I didn't see a whole lot of similarities. Right, the conversation was such that. Um, wasn't exactly reciprocated, our experiences. So at the time, I thought, either I have met you on a bad day, obviously,
Uh-huh.
or maybe there was no connection at all, right? And just for both of us to be sociopathic doesn't necessarily mean we're alike.
Right. That's true because I mean we've seen like a bunch of other sociopathic people together, and sometimes it seems like they're similar and sometimes it doesn't seem like they're similar. So
Yeah.
then fast forward, when do we meet again?
So we meet again. When was this? A year or so later?
I think it was like something like in the spring or early summer versus it was in the winter. So it wasn't quite a year later, but yeah, like
Yeah,
eight
yeah, it wasn't
months.
quite. Yeah, nearly a year.
And
Huh.
then luckily you came again and tell them why maybe you decided to come visit me again, even though the first impression was not that good.
Yeah, so bad first impression. I was in Salt Lake City visiting an ex of mine, and I still had some days left of my vacation. I couldn't bear to spend them anymore with my ex, and I decided to come meet you again, or try to, and see if you were up for it. I did this because something that I have come to know as intuition compelled me to do so. Uh, and that's not to say that I was possessed by the thought or even that I had kind of stewed over our first meeting. It was more that I felt like it was something that I had to do uh, and should do, in fact. So I emailed you and we made plans to meet up again. Uh, on the way to see you, however, I was in a car accident en route to the airport, and I just caught an Uber. I left my ex there on the side of the road,
Dang
and I
it.
caught an Uber to the airport. So I got there. First day we didn't hang out, and probably for a good reason. I mostly slept in an Airbnb. I was like more beat up than I initially anticipated.
From the car
Um,
accident.
yeah, from the car accident. Yeah, mostly like the seatbelt, I think. So, yeah. And do you want to tell them the rest?
Yes, I will. So, but first, did you tell them that it seemed highlighted? Sorry, I was answering a text.
You're fine. You're fine. Yeah. So there is a something that helps you make choices. If I have an array of choices to make or whatever, or options, I should say, I'll often see them lined up like branches of a tree in my mind. And the one that I will eventually say yes to is often brighter than the others, quite literally highlighted, right? And I will eventually choose that one. Later, I'll usually realize, why I chose this one or why was it highlighted for me, because it often leads to better experiences. But yeah, it was highlighted in my mind, very much so, to meet you again.
Yeah, and this, guys, is also how we sometimes choose TV shows to watch.
Books to read.
Yes, what to do that day. Should we go to Chick-fil-A today or not go to Chick-fil-A? Which, if you don't live in a jurisdiction that has Chick-fil-A, hopefully Chick-fil-A eventually gets to you because it's delicious. And we actually just got finished eating at Chick-fil-A. So I'm really glad that you agreed to come on because you are the first female that I've interviewed. And we forgot to tell the rest of the story. So when we did meet up, after like spending a day of like you had me hiking like 10 or 15 miles, it seemed like two separate hikes that were like both like pretty long, but ones that you wanted to do. So that was fun though. And then we ate a bunch of Mexican food. Then we were in Balboa Park, and then which is like a tourist destination. And then I dropped you back at your Airbnb and I said, let's talk logistics and like, how would you feel about making out with me? And you said, no, thank you.
Yes, I did say no thank you, but I mostly said no thank you because after the 15 or so miles of hiking, I was ready to sleep. I was still pretty much sore that entire day, but I just kind of burned through it. And I wasn't very interested at the time.
Yes, but then we did end up skip to the end, happy ending. Yeah. We did end up kissing, and then I felt soul connected to you. And did you feel like your soul was connected to my soul?
Not at the time.
Uh-huh.
No. I more or less thought this was a fun thing to do, interesting thing to do, good twist on things. In fact, I had a layover. I think it was either Houston. I think it was Houston, somewhere in Texas. And when I get off the plane, I, activate my phone again, and I have these texts from you. Like, are we like connected? When are we going to see each other again? I thought this was like preposterous. I mean, why would we need to see each other again? But I did agree, nevertheless, to see you again.
Yes, and then we did long distance thing for a while, and now we live together where I live. That was a decision we came up with together, and so that is kind of like the long and short of it. I don't know if that seems very like sociopathic as a story. I think some of those details maybe do, but not the general trajectory. So we have been talking. I have a couple topics for you. One of them is we've been talking a little bit about how people have kind of gotten rigid in their thinking. They've gotten rigid in their thinking for like whatever reason, and we maybe are seeing more of that rigidity than we would normally. Kind of, there's a phrase or something like you can only see the reef when the tide is out or something. That's when you can really tell what's going on underneath the surface of the water. So I think everybody has kind of been like water, we just see the surface, we don't see what's going underneath. And we have been seeing the tide go out and seeing kind of the underneath the surface. So you told me a hilarious story about your boomer teachers, baby boomer teachers in elementary school. Do you want to tell them about this and kind of its connection to this sort of rigid thinking?
Yeah, sure. So this must have been 3rd or 4th grade, and my homeroom teacher was actually a young person, obviously fresh out of college or whatever. We had like a particularly hot spring, and my elementary school wasn't air conditioned. Normally, we would not be allowed to bring snacks, drinks, these are things that are just for the cafeteria. We have drink breaks coming in from recess, but that's all. So there's this, I don't know, PTA, staff meeting, something, where they decide the kids are allowed to bring water bottles to school, right? I thought this is great, because it was so hot, and by 3 p.m. or so, your kids can't manage, feeling like thirsty, hot, tired by the end of the day, right? So there's like behavioral issues and generally just a bad attitude, you know, by the end of the day. So they allowed us to bring these water bottles. My homeroom teacher, she was all for it. Like she had like rules about the water bottles. For instance, we can't throw them. We can't splash people with water or nothing like that, right? And there are times when we can have them out. We can't have them out all the time, but we have more drink breaks. However, this lasted for maybe a week, and the more boomer generation of teachers decided enough was enough. We'd had enough water and hydration, and we could no longer handle having the water bottles. It's hard for me to imagine what might have happened with the water bottles. But I'm sure, kids are breaking the rules or whatever, what have you, throwing them, playing games, something, right? But nevertheless, it's hard to breathe in the school. So we're no longer allowed to have the water bottles. Of course, parents have this conniption about it. My parents included, actually. And
and the funny thing here is when you're telling me this story, I'm like, the answer seems to be just like have rules about the water,
yes.
like, and you said too that the other thing they had an issue with is that everybody had to take bathroom breaks more frequently. So here you have these like baby boomer teachers who want the kids to just sit there at a desk, sit there quietly doing, just listening raptly as the teacher speaks, right? And they need to get up and use the restroom because they're drinking more water because it's so hot. So they can't have that, so they just kind of get pretty frustrated about that. And then just kind of rather than have like, I guess more frequent bathroom breaks in which everybody's going to the bathroom at the same time, I guess you don't have to repeat yourself as a teacher. They just decided to, no more water. I guess the kids are just going to go thirsty.
Well, I wonder how many bathroom breaks was it really, right?
Yes.
I think it was a little bit of confirmation bias going on there. Maybe 1 or 2 kids asked per period more. And the boomer generation of teachers didn't want them to have the water bottles anyway. This is disrupting the lesson that they're going to the bathroom or, something like this. And we only had 1 hall pass. This is another thing that they brought up. We only have 1 hall pass per
dun, dun, dun. I guess we can't take more hall passes. Wow.
Yes. We can't spend the time to do that, but we can have this PTA meeting about them.
Yes. Right? So you got out of school early so they could have this meeting all about water bottles with the parents, right?
Yes. My mom attended the meeting to explain why the water bottles were necessary. So she's in the camp of pro.
That's probably one of the nicest things that your mom has done for you.
Very nice thing. Maybe the only PTA meeting she went to as well. But me, I was actually really stoked about the water bottles for some reason. I really felt like, wow, this is like some piece of like home and debauchery that has been brought to the classroom.
And kind of like also independence and like, like being able to have even a small choice, like choosing to drink some water, I think is like a big deal if you're kind of in one of these like oppressive boomer classrooms where they just expect you to kind of sit and conform.
Yeah, and the water did make all the difference. I was surprised at how much better I felt by the end of the day. Well, instead of reinstating the water bottles, they decided to do increased drink breaks, which I have a pretty negative experience about them. So, you would get in a line of how many kids are in the homeroom, 15 to 20. And you go up your turn at the water fountain. The teacher stands at eye level with you and counts down from 10. That's how long you have to drink, And naturally, I felt this was, oppressive. Right?
Yes, super oppressive. Like of all the choices to make, this is the thing that they're like, you know what? This is the solution.
Yes, and 10 seconds, 10 seconds, I was like a small child, right? So I would have to, 1, hoist myself up onto the drinking fountain, right? And 2, it's like when you're drinking from a drinking fountain, it's like, who knows, what angle you're at? Are you even getting a good drink? Like half the time the kids are like choking or something. And it's just a mess. It's a mess. And they're still taking out the time, right, to have these drink breaks. Their original argument, it takes too much time out of class to keep giving these kids bathroom breaks, right? yet they are willing to give us these drink breaks. I think that was actually a good chunk of time in which everyone is off task,
But
right?
they just wanted to control the situation more than
Yes,
anything
yes.
else. It
And they
wasn't
were
about the
very,
time.
yeah, it wasn't about the time. I think they, the boomers at least, are very resistant to change if they are not the ones that in fact came up with the change, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least that's the impression I had, you know, and there were some teachers that were like no bathroom breaks at all, right? And I, you know, I thought this was insanity, right? But they maintained that they knew better, right? The water bottles would, let's say, be almost like the gateway drug to misbehaving,
Mm-hmm.
right? They have lost control of third graders or something.
Yes. So, I mean, I think this is kind of an interesting thing. It kind of, and this, for whatever reason, seems like it's been a theme now of like our little discussions, is just like the little irrationalities that we've been seeing in people's thinking. Because if you come up with like a particular method of thinking, for the most part, it's going to work well or be obvious to you over like the decades of your life, right? People who I guess are homeless, people who have had major issues are in prison, those people, their thinking was obviously kind of maybe a little bit off. But we have now like a significant portion of the population that's had thinking that's kind of off, but the situation hasn't been such that we've been able to like really kind of see that. You know, they're still living largely functional lives. But they're living kind of lives that have like a little bit of a twist to them in terms of the way they perceive reality. So I think that's been kind of an interesting thing. By the way, guys, I think you have access to the chat, and feel free to ask any questions you want to in the chat. So it kind of reminded me of a situation I got in a discussion, maybe it's with one of you, who on Twitter, and he said he was an architect, and he said he basically was like, I don't know what's the complaint about wanting the beaches open in California. Because he said, you know, it seems like, and there were 3 different tweets, and in 2 separate of the tweets, he mentioned these people, like, isn't everybody still supposed to be going to work? You know, it's not like this is a vacation. Like he said, basically, he thought that people who wanted the beaches
Quarantine is
open,
not a
yeah, yeah,
vacation.
yeah. Hmm. They didn't understand sacrifice. So he said that 2 times, you know, like these people should be working anyways, and they don't know how to sacrifice, and it's just like entitled thinking that makes them want to go to the beach. And I thought that's kind of like an interesting way to kind of think, because he clearly is coming from a place of his own perspective about things, you know. And remind me before I forget this, to talk about too the online learning comment too,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's
Mm-hmm.
clearly coming from a place of his own perspective, which is he's still employed, but he's doing work from home. So I kind of just told him, look, I have like I'm a sole practitioner for law, right? So I have my own business, and I freelance for a couple other different lawyers. But practice has basically died, you know, like a lot of my
Yeah.
clients are doing
Yes.
nothing because they're in shutdown mode. And then the other ones that are still working are either too busy, you know, they'll like want to be doing like different legal things, like, oh, let's go ahead and trademark this or something, you know, like it's all kind of emergency kind of thinking. So for the first solid like 4 to 6 weeks of lockdown, I had like basically nothing. I went from like working pretty regularly to just completely dried up. So I just kind of briefly explained that to him and said, you know, not everybody has that life where they just have like a work from home thing where they're still working. I'm on basically a forced vacation, and I would just like to walk on the beach in the mornings, you know.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And I think
Yes.
he didn't
It's the
respond to
least
that.
you're able to do.
Yes, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like I already am sacrificing, you know. I'm not
Yes.
making any money during these like 6 weeks, and it's
Yes.
not bad, but it's also kind of like, well, you know, like what is so wrong about the beach? And he also said there aren't that many ingresses and egresses. That's why he mentioned he's an architect. He's like, I think about that stuff. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
well, you know, it is true. There are some beaches with bluffs that you have to get down to the beach via stairs, but those
Mhm.
beaches, the bluff doesn't last for forever. It lasts for maybe a quarter of a mile. And most of the
Also,
beaches,
what kind of transmission is happening in a brief interaction walking down a flight of stairs,
yes.
right?
And
Can
I
you
also
clear the
told
way
them,
for someone and like perhaps take turns?
yes. I also told them like most of the beaches, they're flat, right? So the ingress and
Mhm.
egress is along an entire sidewalk. There's like a parking lot or people
Yeah.
park all along the beach, so it's like there's like
Mhm.
literally infinity ingresses and egresses to these beaches.
Mhm.
But it's
Mhm.
just kind of like people get like these kind of fixed ideas about the world, I think, and it comes largely from a perspective of thinking that everybody kind of thinks and acts just like they do, right? So another
Mhm.
example, and this is, I think, actually one of the issues, we'll try to get around to this if I remember, that people have with
Mhm.
psychopaths is you expect them to think and act like you do, and when they don't, you kind of act as if they should have, or should have told you.
Yes.
Both those things,
Mhm.
that they should have or should have told you that they don't think and act just like you. And I think, the answer is not that we get every single person who is kind of like abnormal to start disclosing their identity. I think the answer
Mhm.
is to start being a little bit more open to the fact that nobody thinks or acts just like you. Like everybody's situation is so different. So the other thing we were talking about earlier is there's this economist I really respect, and he quoted, I think it was on his blog, he quoted this, I think she was like 12 years old girl, kind of around that sort of age, and she said she loved online learning, loved to do the Zoom classes, loved to do like the videos, loved all these different things, and said it's so much better. And she had several things that supported her argument. She said, most of the time teachers are just trying to deal with discipline issues, behavioral problems. So 20-40% of the time they're dealing with that. If you miss something in class, then you could be lost for the rest of class because you don't understand a key issue, but the teacher just keeps moving on. Whereas online learning, you can go back and rewind the video and
Yeah. And what if
watch
they
it
have
again.
water bottles
Yes,
and it's
water
true
bottles.
debauchery?
For instance, you can have like a little free, have the water bottles to use the restroom whenever you need to. If you're feeling a little tired, you can take a nap and wake up and, eat snacks. These are not even the ones she mentioned, but there are like a ton of reasons why you might
Yeah.
prefer this. And so he kind of
Yes.
was like, so therefore online learning is better and it's going to replace all in-person learning. And I was like,
Do you
hold it.
see the error in judgment there?
Yes. And
Yeah,
because
this is one
he,
testimony of out of how many
yes.
children that are online learning right now.
Exactly. And I just read another tweet from somebody who was like, my daughter is so sick of online learning that she literally cut the computer cable, the power cable. She went into the kitchen, she grabbed the shears, and she cut it. She's just done with it, right? And this guy, this economist, he teaches online and he kind of seems like the type of personality who would also enjoy learning online, right? So I'm like, okay, I get it. Online, and I do think online as an option is great, especially for
Yes.
kids who have like various needs. Let's say they don't like to wake up in the morning, there's
Hmm.
a lot of great things about it. But he too seemed to be like online learning's the best, and I thought,
Hmm.
why do we have such an issue with this? Why do we always jump to this kind of like idea that there has to be kind of a superlative or like one
Yes.
size fits all box?
Everything is either or,
Yes, yeah,
right?
it either online learning sucks or it's the best or something. And it's not just that, it's
Yes.
that for
Uh-huh.
everybody.
And I'm speaking for everyone.
Exactly. I'm speaking for everyone. And I think,
Hmm.
normal people are used to having people share their thoughts and opinions. And I almost feel this is something that just a thought that just occurred to me. I almost wonder all the issues with like the what do we say, we're polarized, right,
Oh,
politically, and
yes.
these other
Uh-huh.
different issues.
Yeah.
People like we've politicized every single thing. Even
Hmm.
now, like mask wearing is politicized. Like
Yes.
online learning is politicized. Everything is
Yes. You wear a
politicized.
mask, you're a wussy liberal,
Yes,
right?
and those are your constitutional rights, and people are getting
Yep.
harassed, and Costco's being
Yes.
boycotted, and all these kind of weird things are happening that you wouldn't expect mask wearing to be politicized. It's just an issue of like public health,
Your own personal
either
choice as well,
yes,
right? Wear a mask or don't wear a mask.
right, yeah, don't go to Costco or something, but it's like, it's not that you just have a different opinion. They want you to share their different opinion. And without you sharing their different opinion, they feel challenged, like they feel personally challenged. Like it's not okay for you to have one reality and them to have a different reality, and that to just be the truth. But I think
Mhm.
that's kind of like insane making, crazy making, because
Yeah, their mask wearing is a part of their identity, right? It says so much more now
well,
about
not
them.
just that, but it's like they think you're crazy for not thinking the way that they do.
Oh,
You
yeah,
know,
absolutely. Yeah.
they cannot understand that like reasonable minds could differ on this like particular issue
Yes.
or any issue. And it kind of
Yep.
reminds me, I grew up in a big family. You did not grow up in a big family, but you've been exposed to my siblings. And it's like
Hmm.
everybody has their own memory of like what happened when we were growing up, you know?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
sometimes they agree and sometimes they don't agree. Sometimes
Yes.
they're like, okay, yes, this is what happened, and sometimes not. We have a question. It says from Happy Day, doesn't our educational system itself teach people that there is only one right answer to most questions? What do you think?
I would say that depends on the educator, in my experience.
Yeah.
I found the, shall we say, boomer, right,
Mm-hmm.
educators to be a little bit more resistant to opinion, right?
Mm.
But I also found a couple professors in college that I would, um, educated guess, are very liberal, were also resistant to understanding someone else's point of view, right? They have a
Yes.
hard time. They have a hard time believing that two different realities can exist, right? At the same time, the point of contention is when they have to converge, like in a
Mm.
classroom, for example, right? Um, and there should be a right and wrong answer for these issues, like mask wearing or something, right? It's not just right or wrong. It's a matter of personal expression now, right? And you shouldn't wear a mask, for example, because let's say the CDC or the World Health Organization has been wishy-washy about the mask, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you should wear a mask, right? Because now they've taken that position, right? They recommend wearing the mask. Um, yeah, I found that you can be educated. Of course, you can think for yourself too, right? I mean, they just don't want to hear it, right? If you do have a different opinion, they don't enjoy hearing it. Certain people.
Yes, and so yeah, so like getting to this kind of educational system, I do think the educational system kind of trends to being like this is a right answer. In fact, I took the California bar exam, right, for being a lawyer, and it's like some of these things I'm like, is this the right answer? The right answer? I think actually
Mhm.
here that reasonable minds could differ too. There are more gray
Yes.
areas than you might think, but
Yes.
that's more difficult to test. So I do agree
Hmm.
with Happy Day. Oh, Happy Day continues. Isn't this an argument for the humanities education? Standardized tests have right answers. I think it is a little bit
Hmm.
argument for humanities education. So people, if you're not familiar, like the traditional university structure was like this idea that you're kind of like more training your mind, opening your mind than necessarily learning something, right? So
Hmm.
you're gonna
Thinking better.
Yes. So you're going to be exposed to this like broad kind of category of like basically every type of different learning, kind of a renaissance, own personal renaissance. And then after you learn to think kind of critically and better about things, then you can go on and kind of study whatever skill or trade is the thing that you're going to do. But also, uh, yes. So this idea, though, that we've kind of been mentioning about like, can people accept that other people have a different reality? And I find that a lot of people, when I say, I don't agree or something, sometimes they'll
Mhm.
think that that's of itself hostile. To say like,
Yes.
I don't share that opinion is
Right.
necessarily
Or
hostile
you're
and
accused of
antagonistic.
gaslighting them, for example.
Yes, gaslighting,
Right.
right? Because it's
Yes.
like if you don't share that same kind of opinion, they take it as a challenge that they're wrong. And I
Hmm.
don't necessarily think,
Yes, that you're objecting to their own version of
yes,
reality. Yes.
and there has to be a way in which you can express yourself and be like, that's just not my reality without kind of like feeling like you're gaslighting. And I think the most straightforward way is to be like, I disagree. I disagree,
Yes.
or my opinion is
Yes.
similar but different. Like my view is
Yes.
just not, it doesn't match yours perfectly. You know, I guess
Yes.
that those are like softer ways to kind of say it, but I also think there's kind of like an issue where people, you know, there's like this concept, Paul Graham, I guess he's called a like hacker philosopher, and he's a really interesting person, but he has a great article. I think, have I had you read it before? Keep Your Identity Small.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think my therapist would call these sorts of things identity hits. Like somebody has kind of like cast the net of their identity too wide, you know, so they're identifying with like thousands of different things, like every single belief that they have about the world, every single political belief, every single religious belief, every single like, you know, like economic belief, you know, all these different
Hmm.
opinions. They
They open
identify.
themselves up to that criticism, right?
Well, and they think those things are me. You know, I am my
Yeah.
beliefs. So if you
Yeah.
challenge their belief, I think that's why they perceive it to be a personal challenge, is because they identify with those different things. You know, like I believe in capitalism, or I believe in communism, or socialism, or whatever like the thing is. You know, I think that's the best. And so when you say, you know, capitalism sucks, or communism sucks, socialism sucks, you know, they're hearing in their mind, you suck, you know, because they
Yes.
they are a communist, or they are a capitalist, or they're whatever they've kind of identified. And I think we see it a lot with football hooliganism, right? Like the we call it soccer in the United States, but I think the rest of the world calls it football.
Football.
so,
Yeah.
so these like these different fans of these different kind of football clubs, you know, who are like, you know, I'm like Manchester United, ride or die. And then if anybody says anything bad about Manchester United, like people have been killed before over like football
Yes.
hooliganism.
Yes.
And it's like, why would you kill somebody for that? But it seems like it's because of this kind of identity issue, because we have like a natural instinct to fight or flight, right? And I think
Hmm.
we especially feel this instinct when we feel like our personhood is threatened. When our person or our personhood is threatened, we feel especially triggered by this kind of fight or flight attitude. And so if you have kind of identified your Manchester United fandom as being so integral to who you are, you know, then I
So
think
would you
what's
say, let's say if you're getting bullied for being a Manchester United fan, right?
mhm.
Perhaps you feel a little powerless in that moment because it's so integral to your identity
Well,
and your
so
means of self-expression.
yes, so powerless and so threatened, like somebody is
Yes.
personally attacking you. So Galaxy S9
Yes.
says tribalism plays a part. And yes, I do agree.
Yes.
I think
I
that
agree.
tribalism, but I almost feel like there is a really interesting connection, I think, between the social and the individual. You know, constantly what
Mm.
keeps reinforcing. The individual reinforces the social reinforces the individual behavior and beliefs, et cetera, et cetera. But I think when we say tribalism, you know, like there, I definitely think there is that aspect going on, but I think there's also just the, even if you took out the social aspect of Manchester United, you know, I think people who identify so strongly as being fans still feel it, like in the way that my
Yes.
therapist calls an identity hit. It's like
Yes.
somebody has not just insulted a belief of yours, somebody has
Mhm.
insulted you. So Happy Day
Yes.
says, what characteristics of sociopathy are core values to you both that would threaten you personally? Hmm. What
Yeah.
characteristics do you mean, Happy Day? Like like personality characteristics, like charm or something? Core values, like efficiency, threaten you personally? So one thing, this is like a good kind of like segue maybe, and you can follow up with that, Happy Day. But one thing that I think is different and kind of is why we have a perspective on this that's different than most people is that I have always said, or not always said, but for a long time have said that psychopaths, really the main characteristic that a psychopath has is just they have a weak sense of self, right? Uh,
Hmm.
so antisocial personality disorder, it is a personality disorder. And the issue with our personality that we have is that we just don't feel like we have any personality at
Yeah.
all.
You're always a clean slate.
Yeah, clean
Right.
slate, you're a chameleon, you know, you
It's
kind of,
hard to be offended, when you're like a Patriots fan today, right? Tomorrow you might be a Bengals fan, right? You don't actually
exactly.
have any emotional attachment to bands you listen to, authors you like, right? Maybe you do and you don't recognize it, right? But you wouldn't feel personally offended if someone said, hey, the Beatles suck.
Yes, yes. Like what you said, this caveat would be a very narrow exception. You know, like maybe you
Yes.
truly do feel, you know, I don't know, whatever it is, like identity issue. But for like 98, 99% of the stuff that you're saying, doing, you know, participating in, the groups you identify with, it's all just kind of garbage. You know, it's all just like an act, kind of.
Yes, yes.
Galaxy.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
So happy days continues. So is your argument for greater flexibility of mind an argument to be more like a sociopath? Yes and no. I think that the sociopath has different problems. You know, it would be like, think about somebody who's homeless, you know, yeah, they don't have to worry about the same sorts of things you worry about, but it doesn't necessarily mean that being homeless is better. But could you get a little bit more zen like a homeless person is and live in the moment a little bit more, maybe? You know, I'm making like kind of like stereotypes.
Could you be more stoic, right?
Yeah, or more stoic,
normal
or
people
more
could be more stoic.
Yeah,
in their interactions with us.
Yeah. So there are different ways that like we just have different faults, I guess. It's different kind of natural ways, but it kind of is a little bit more of an argument to be more like a sociopath in the sense that it's what Paul Graham says, which is keep your identity small. Like you don't need to identify with 1,000 things. You know, you can identify with more like a couple dozen, and you would you wouldn't be experiencing this. And then Galaxy S9 says, yes, often feels like a mirror to who you're with. And that is true, yes, because we have such a weak sense of self that we're like,
it matters what I would like to do with them.
Yeah.
I'm with, right? It's totally fine, right? Like if I'm let's say I'm a Trump supporter and I'm in the room with a Clinton supporter. If the Clinton supporter does nothing for me, I won't feel any, and nothing would stop me from saying I'm a Trump supporter, right? Like let's say I'm in the room with the Hillary Clinton supporter and this is a girl that I've decided to seduce, right? I might tell her all the great things that I know about Hillary Clinton, right?
Yeah.
But I don't feel any personal attachment to either political party, you know, in reality.
Yeah, and it's funny because you've told me probably dozens of times that you voted for Trump, and you just say it.
Yes, I also feel a little bit like a professional troll in that way, right?
Yeah, because you don't care, but you kind of like, you know, it's interesting, a little bit interesting, almost from like a, why would you, you know, take a science class or like examine, you know, the body parts of a ladybug or something. There's a natural kind of curiosity in which you're like playing with somebody else's mind a little bit, not in the sense that you're like trying to hurt the person, but in I think more in the sense that you're just like, oh, this is interesting. Like it's this really is a trigger.
Different way of interacting, right? I even think in a more open way of interacting.
What is more open?
I think the differences between us and normal people, right, is a lot in our interactions, right? Normal people are personally offended by things we do and don't do. You know, I've had several people who are personally offended that I didn't seduce them, you know, that I didn't meddle in their lives, right? Normal people can be really rigid that way, right? And confusing even.
Confusing to you?
Yes.
In like what sorts of ways?
For me, I mean, I don't have as many run-ins with people, right? Negative interactions with people anymore. But before, it was always, they wanted me to guess, right? They want me to guess why they're upset. They want me to guess why they're angry, right? And when I don't get the right answer, it makes them more angry, right? The more I'm guessing, the angrier they're getting, right? But they still like me to guess.
Why do you think they like you to guess?
I don't think it is that they like to test us, right? Like this is a test, it's not pass fail, right? I think they have a hard time expressing themselves, right, to us, right, in a way that we can understand, right? Or maybe they're afraid to.
Afraid that we'll like say no, like if they ask us just flat out, like, hey, can you, you know, be gentle with me?
I don't think they're afraid of the rejection, right? I think they're afraid of the vulnerability with us, right?
With us specifically, or just like in general?
With sociopaths specifically.
Do you think they feel more vulnerable around a sociopath than they would like a normal person?
In my experience, yes.
Why do you think maybe they feel more vulnerable?
I think they feel more vulnerable, right? Because usually they're, at least in my experience and others' experiences with me, right? Um, though I've been accused, of maybe being like a pathological liar, for example, I'm also brutally honest, right? That brutal honesty is something that I think normal people have a hard time swallowing, right? Or being stoic in the face of their emotional reactions, for example, right?
Yeah. So they're crying and you're just straight faced still.
Yes, I might be straight faced, but they could take, let's say they could take the straight faced, stony faced person and say, oh, they just don't care, right? They kind of automatically make all these assumptions about you, right? And your character, rather than ask, right?
Yeah,
They don't like the liminal space in between knowing for sure, right? What you're thinking or feeling.
I see. So
Yep.
maybe that they just find us harder to understand and predict. And so they feel, and I think they feel like we see things about them that normal people don't see, things that they
Yes.
have gotten used to being private.
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
So, okay, Happy Day asks, what would personally offend you? Do
Hmm.
you have an answer to that? What would personally offend you?
Nothing comes to mind immediately.
Hmm.
However, I think the very few people that I am, quote unquote, out to, when they assign all of my actions with this kind of, they categorize them as malicious, right, or intentional, right? You intentionally hurt my feelings, for example. I do get offended by that, right? I even get offended when people are kind of like, uh, how do I say this? Like, why can't you, choose me, seduce me, crush on me, right? I get offended this way too, you know, these
Hmm.
kinds of things now with the more sociopathic label, right? When all of my actions, reactions, and uh, responses are filtered through that lens, I can be offended, yes.
Yeah, so I find that especially before therapy, the things that would personally offend me, that seem to like trigger me the most kind of emotionally, is like when I felt like I was already behaving like really well, like on my best behavior,
Mm.
but somebody still criticized me and said that I had done something wrong and kind
Yeah,
of
when
were
you
like
didn't even
trying
do
to.
anything.
Yes, that's
Hmm.
that's a phrase that we use with each other is like, I didn't even do anything, right? And it's happened so many times. And if you've read the book, it's like why I get so upset about that DC Metro worker who, like, I was just like walking down what I thought, I guess these are the stairs now. Like, we're using this escalator as stairs because I didn't see anything. And he starts getting up in my face about, like, didn't you see the sign? And I'm like, no, I didn't see any sign. I didn't
And
do
you read every
anything.
sign.
Yes. Yes, I was already trying to be careful. It's not
Right.
like I was like, oh, just screw it, like he wants me to like walk over here, but I'm just gonna like F him. So
Right.
I think that's what we kind of people naturally kind of assume that for some reason that we've done something maliciously, we've done something
Yes.
intentionally, and they get upset about it, and it's like I don't deserve this. Not only don't I deserve this, but now I'm angry for some reason. But now with therapy, something that would personally offend me would be somebody violating my kind of boundaries or personhood. If somebody, and this is what I think bullies are. I think they classically, what they do is disregard the personhood of others. I think that's what makes
Hmm.
them so kind of terrorizing, the people that they end up bullying. And so, like, even before I kind of went to therapy, I was aware that I did not like bullies, even though
Yeah.
I could not tell you why, but I knew I did not like them. And now I still think the people who like intentionally, really, but even unintentionally violate your personhood and don't respect your autonomy, your agency, your right to choose, your right to believe what you want to believe, basically your personal boundaries. People who don't respect those are the things that personally offend me. Other than that, I think I am pretty good about being like, here's my reality and there's your reality and they're different.
Hmm.
But it does not personally offend me that they're different. Even if people said, like, you know, hey, you're ugly or whatever. And it's like,
Right.
does that personally offend me? It still kind of doesn't, in the way that it
Yes.
personally offends more normal people, I think. So here's another question. You are supposed to be able to read, quote them if you care. I see. With regard to like, hey, you know, people don't want to go to the trouble of explaining their feelings. You're supposed to just guess. So you're supposed to
Yeah.
be able to read them if you care. Never made much sense, but that what I have been told, accusations of not listening due to not responding as expected. That's another one. Is like when people
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
like, I feel like you don't even understand what I'm saying. You're not listening. And it's like, I feel like I
Yes.
do
I get
hear
the
you.
you're not paying attention, right?
Yes.
Uh, yeah.
They just expect that you misunderstood or something, when it's like, no, I think I heard you. I just disagree. That's not my perspective. I don't share that reality. And that can still be
Yep.
really difficult for people to have. So here's another one.
Mhm.
There is an idea floating around that many personality disorders that we previously labeled as borderline, socio, or narcissist are now thought to be complicated PTSD responses. What do you think?
I think that's possible, right? We see this all the time. Traumatic experiences in childhood reflect themselves later in life, um, usually in negative ways, right? My therapist, for example, is he's very anti-diagnosis, right? He won't diagnose anyone. In fact, um, the psychology world, right, is trying to move away from diagnosis. Why? Because of comorbidity, right? Instead of saying, hey, you know, you're a sociopath, right? They might say you have, you know, sociopathic, or let's say antisocial, right, tendencies, and maybe some obsessive compulsive tendencies as well.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because I think with that Killing an Evening, we kind of start talking about this. Like, who do diagnoses benefit? Like, why did we come up with them in the first place?
Mhm.
And I think they don't hardly benefit at all the individual, let's say the patient, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
they become labeled this thing. You know, sometimes they
Yes.
can, maybe, or I guess if you're being discriminated against, or maybe you can kind of like research and find out some more stuff, like kind of like you did, right? People told you, hey,
Yes.
you might be a
Yes.
sociopath, and
Yes.
maybe that did help you in some ways, right? But I think
Mm-hmm.
that the diagnoses in general, they seem to be like psychology's attempt at legitimacy. You know, we're just like medicine, you know, like we're just like physical medicine. You know,
Mm-hmm.
appendicitis is basically the same thing as antisocial personality disorder, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
just as valid a concept to say somebody has appendicitis as it is to say somebody has antisocial personality disorder. And I think that is just not true. It's not true. It's never been true. But that's what they kind of
Yes.
tried to do during like the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And then they kind of like painted themselves in this corner of like trying to still say that that's a legitimate thing, even though there's so many diagnostic tools being shown that they're not that great.
Right. Yes. They're not helpful to the patient. The patient. My
Or
psychologist would say.
yes, and or they're not yeah, so they're not even helping the patient, the thing that you thought the whole point of diagnoses would do, right? And they're
Right.
not valid or reliable, in the sense that they're not measuring what they're claiming to measure, number
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Yeah. And they don't account for change as
Oh,
well, right?
interesting. Tell me that perspective.
So let's say when I started going to therapy, was 3 years ago, for instance, I probably, if we're like talking about a sociopathic scale, right, I would say I was a 9. Okay.
Hmm.
And since then, like I said, he is anti-diagnosis, but he has given me, you know, a rough estimation what's going on, right? But now I think that I would score myself at a 6, right? Um, do you ever get to a point in your life where maybe you're not diagnosable anymore, right? It's kind of like the Alcoholics Anonymous, right? You're always an alcoholic. You just didn't drink today, right?
Right.
So you always sociopath 9, you know, because you've had the capability to be that, right? And you were that. So are you always that, right? Carrying around the label isn't useful.
Yeah, wow, that's really interesting. And can you tell us a little bit, like, what kind of diagnostic criterion did you find to be helpful? Because your therapist, I think, has done an excellent job in terms of seeing you
Yeah.
not as a label, but seeing you as a person.
Yeah, I'm actually, I'm pretty relieved that he did not see me as a label, or I wasn't already labeled, right? I think certain therapists, maybe not my own, 'cause you're right, he's great, uh, would be reluctant to help me, right? I would be beyond help. However, my therapist, when we first started speaking, we were more or less having empty conversations. How is the weather? What are you watching on TV? Right? Until we started digging a little bit deeper. About a year and a half in or so, he had me take the MMPI too, I believe.
Do you remember what those initials are? Minnesota something personality inventory?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I took that for him, and he interpreted the results for me, and one of his colleagues as well interpreted the results. And then kind of gave me a little bit of like obviously I don't understand these like line graphs, right? All these things, but they more or less showed where I scored high, let's say, right? And he said that the takeaway from the like exam was my own, right? I might have these characteristics, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's me, right? Or, what if I were to take it now? Would I score the same way, right? I think that's possible. However, I think it's also a test you cannot game, right? You are not going to be able to perform on this test. I mean, I think especially if you're someone like me, it's 500 questions. I mean, I remember getting to like question 236 and thinking like, wow, my brain is dead. I'm tired. I'm bored. He's lucky I like him. And I'm still taking this. I will finish it, right? And I don't just hit yes for every single question, right? Just to get it over with, for example.
So I think the test is interesting that way too, because if you're neurotic, then your neuroticism is going to increase, as if you're on number 236. And if you're prone to boredom and carelessness, you'll see that increase as well. So I have heard really good things about the MMPI in terms of being a very reliable test.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure that it is. I had to take like several breaks. He's messaging me, how are we doing here, right? And in fact, he asked me, would you like to take it in my office, right? And I told him, well, I don't pay you to give me a test, right? I'll take it at home and we can talk when I'm there. Right? You're not taking my dollars just to test me for something, right?
Yes.
But yeah, it takes several hours, and I didn't. I don't know if you remember. Maybe it took a week or so to get the results back and like really interpret them.
Well, from when he first pitched it to you, it took you a month to even 2 months maybe to even consider taking it,
Yeah,
and
that is true.
Yeah. And were there surprises on the results for you?
For me, I was surprised that I wasn't able to game it, right? Like you might see trends in questions, like, do you resent your mother? Let's say 50 questions later, it's like, do you think you have resentment for your mother? You're like, you've already asked me this, right? But once you get to question 400, it's like, have I read this before? I mean, it all starts blending together. So you kind of start to think this is a good tool to assess someone. I think I felt resistant to the label in general, and that's why I didn't want to take the test. I also didn't want to like spend my time taking a test, right?
Yeah.
It's like high-powered boss or whatever, I don't have time to take these little tests or whatever.
Why do you think oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Why do you think you were resistant to the label?
I think I was resistant to the label. Like I said before, right? It's now the very few people who do know. A lot of my actions and responses and reactions to things are filtered through that, and I think that's what my therapist would say. It's not helpful to have a label, right? Yeah. It's sort of like a constant excuse or reiteration, right, of the things that might be wrong with you, right? And he doesn't actually think there's anything wrong necessarily.
Yeah, just things that need to be tweaked. Yeah, it's kind of like we both know people who are bipolar. And imagine if we were like, oh, that's just your bipolar talking. In some ways it can be helpful to understand. Offensive. Yes. But in other ways, it's just another way to be kind of what we talked about at the beginning. Be rigid in your thinking and just put people or things or situations in boxes and just be like, this is the truth, capital T, and I'm never going to question this belief again. Luckily I made this. So Galaxy S9 says psychology can be kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. Psychology is not a science in traditional sense. Outline a problem, not the same as a solution. So this is kind of a little bit related because, I come from the legal field, which has a similar issue to psychology in that like a lot of it's bunk, like a lot of it's bogus, a lot of it's garbage. a lot of it's garbage, and like saying, okay, we're going to put you in prison and now we're going to kill you based on this garbage, based on these garbage assumptions, you know, like
And there's
justice.
a lot of gray area.
Yes, and justice is blind, and do juries actually work, and all these different kind of things that nobody has really cared to prove. And it's like, well, okay, we're like basing these huge decisions on it. So I mentioned this last week that I've kind of been very casually listening audiobook to Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers. And the part that I just listened to most recently was talking about it, and you can kind of Google it and see a little bit more using probably the keywords New York, Malcolm Gladwell talking to strangers, and bail hearings, right? So these people who got arrested and then spent a night in jail, and then the next morning when the court opens up, they're getting arraigned, and the judge is setting bail, right? And a judge could set, you know, dozens of people's bail in any different morning, you know, handling all these things. And so I guess some researchers, one of them was University of Chicago bail expert. And then there was like a computer scientist, I think, who specialized in artificial intelligence, and then somebody else, I kind of forget. And they came up with a kind of algorithm, let's say, or artificial intelligence to make their own assessments about whether or not people should get bail. And there was some large number, I forget what it was, like 4,000 or 40,000 or 400,000. They took all these different bail decisions, you know, that judges make. And the judges consider things like, oh, okay, well, he has kids and he has this job, and if he doesn't, you know, if he goes to jail, then he will lose the job, and then the kids will starve, you know, or he has like these misdemeanors, or he has these other things going on. And so they're taking all of this into consideration, and what they're trying to do is not give bail to people that are likely to reoffend during the bail period, especially a violent reoffense. You know, like you don't want to let a murderer out and then they just keep murdering people. That's like the worst kind of situation. So they had this algorithm that's processing, let's say, 40,000, these 40,000 cases, and the algorithm did 25% better than the actual judges did. Not only that, Malcolm Gladwell said, like, the very top 1% of the most, let's say, dangerous, potentially dangerous people, most likely to reoffend, that the algorithm came up with, you know, and the algorithm's like, definitely we would never let these people out on bail no matter what. No matter what their situation, even if they had like 60 kids, you know, that they needed to support or whatever else it is, we wouldn't let them out. For the judges, the normal human judges, they let about 49 point something percent, so almost 50% of those very top 1% dangerous offenders, the human judges let them out. And so you have this situation where it's just like, it's garbage decision making. You know, it's like garbage upon garbage. Like, if a computer can do better, then why don't we just have a computer? Like, our legal systems truly suck. And it's like, nobody wants to kind of point it out or acknowledge it, because then what do? Let the prison doors open and just everybody has to get reassessed or something? And I feel like psychology is kind of in a similar situation.
Is the MMPI superior to telling you about yourself, right?
Yes. Than you, or than other things. It's really interesting. Well, I mean, I don't know why Zoom has just let us keep going, but it seems like a pretty good place to kind of wrap up, unless you want to tell the story of Jordan with his pants down.
Speaking of bully, should we just end on this note? It's a good story.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one.
Okay. So I think I might have been in first or second grade, right? You're still kind of getting acclimated to being away from your parents all day or whatever, your caregiver. And there was a kid in my class. His name is Jordan. And
maybe we should have changed his name. Sorry, Jordan.
Yeah, sorry. He's not watching. Don't worry. So Jordan was maybe a 10 out of 10 socially inept, right?
Dang it, Jordan.
Had a strange tooth issue, you know, already missing teeth, Mountain Dew mouth as all get out. And was more or less, you know, just your typical weirdo. You know, he didn't have a lot of friends, and he didn't seem to care either. But it also put him at risk for being bullied, right? And we had an art class together, and our art teacher, she was actually a boomer, but she was surprisingly open-minded, right?
Yeah, because she was an art teacher. Yeah, art
she's
teacher
like
woman.
ex-hippie. Yeah.
Speaking of stereotypes, as we just apply these stereotypes.
Yeah. So Jordan takes the bathroom pass and goes to the bathroom on his own, right? There was another girl in my class. Let's rename her Layla, for example. Layla, she is like your token bully, right? Not only is she bigger than every boy and every girl in the class, but she's also outgoing, right? Definitely already has a chip on her shoulder by first grade somehow, right? Lived this like rough life.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan comes storming into the classroom and we're like painting. I'm like drawing pictures of who knows what, dead animals or something. And I'm just kidding. And but
Not yet.
yeah, not yet, guys. That's for another meeting.
Yeah.
So he comes in with his pants around just maybe below his knees, right? And
When you say pants, you mean like his exterior pants or both his
both,
underpants? Okay.
both
So
his underpants and
his
regular
pee-pee
pants.
stick is out.
Yes, it's waving
his bum
around. I
bum
mean,
is
for a
out.
lot of us, this might have been the first time, right? For me, I was like, wow, I've never seen a pee-pee stick before today.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't even know what this is. So he is like, how do we say, tiptoeing into the room, but quickly, kind of like a tap dancer, right? And he's still peeing, right? He's still peeing. And
so his pants are down, his pee-pee is coming out, and it's like, what is he doing
There's a trail
in the
of
classroom?
Yes. What is going on here? What is the cause for alarm, right? He is maybe a little selective mute, right? And he's kind of shrieking, so for me, at least watching it, I was frozen and like, shock maybe. I'm like, what is going on here? Like, is he sick? I don't understand what's happening. Our art teacher gets up really quick and like shuffles him outside, like, come on, Jordan. Meanwhile, Layla, the bully, right, starts making fun of him, right? She's like, I think she might have called him a retard and gay or something like this, right?
Uh-huh.
I've never liked bullies. That's something we definitely have in common. And me, I was maybe the smallest girl in my class, very little. I look very meek and mild even now, I think. And I approached Layla, right, to tell her, it was wrong to make fun of him. There's something wrong with him, obviously. I mean, some cause for concern. I don't know how I said it to her, right? And it escalates, of course, right? I think that she felt maybe somebody had knocked her crown off or something, which wasn't what I was trying to do. It was more that I just felt like she was making a bad situation worse, right? No one else was laughing with her, mind you. I think everybody was kind of in shock, And so I'm kind of like telling her off, and I tell her like she's just a bully and a loser, whatever. I can't, this is so long ago, right? 20-something years ago. And I end up punching her in the face, right?
Nice.
And I get in a bunch of trouble, right? And this girl, she didn't take it well, right? In fact, she's kind of like running my name around to other kids in other classes who are also her kind of bullying friends, or little minions, I should say.
That was like later that day. So number one, I shouldn't have said nice about the punching. Punching's not the right answer. Okay,
yeah,
keep
punching's
going.
not right, but I did. And then we were in line. I'd spent the day in the principal's office. There was no suspension happening. I think because they looked at me, they're like, this little meek little girl, and maybe she was beating up a bully. She was righting a wrong, I guess. Or maybe this isn't how it looks, right?
Yeah.
Later on in the day after lunch, we're getting ready for our recess period, and we stand in line, and they let us out kind of, they don't exactly open the floodgates, right? They're only letting out a certain amount of kids at a time. And Layla, the bully, is back in line, and she's kind of, talking shit to me. I can hear her talking about me, snickering about me. And she starts calling me a freak, right? She's calling me a freak and like, who's friends with Jordan anyway, right? And that's the last thing I actually remember hearing, right? And again, it's mostly that I felt like I didn't do anything wrong by sticking up for Jordan, right? I thought it was actually wrong to make fun of him. It's like humiliating. And I punched her again.
Oh, okay.
In line, which led to my suspension, but no regrets.
Yeah. So I like the story though. You go home and also tell your grandmother, right? She's like, "Why'd you get suspended?" And what'd you tell her?
Yeah. So my grandmother is also it's worth noting that she's probably sociopath 10 somewhere in her life. And
speaking of like complicated PTSD reactions.
Yeah. So she's like, who was it and why? Right. So I explained the whole Jordan situation. She's laughing at Jordan as well. Right. You know, I'm like explaining to her, like, his wiener was out, he's peeing. And who knows what she's imagining, right? I mean, it is easy to laugh at, but it's mostly you're laughing at the shock, right? Like, what would, you know, a bunch of first graders do? And then I tell her that it's Layla. And she says, isn't Layla the African-American girl in class?
Racism.
Yes, racism. Trigger warning.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, it was. And she was like, she deserved it.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So, you know, who knows how much I evaded punishment there because Layla was black. But
yeah, because of racism. And she just looks bigger than you and stuff.
Yeah.
That's interesting. All right. Yep. So we'll wrap it up with that story about another boomer teacher having a different sort of reaction. And we will try to reschedule next week. So we did Asian Australian time today. And so next week we'll go back to European evening, Sunday morning for the Americans. All right, everybody. Have a good week. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.